Today we will be talking about BoJack Horseman Season 1, Episode 8, The Telescope. I will be analyzing the conflict between Herb and BoJack. A quick summary of this episode is that BoJack is the star of a 90s sitcom, and the show takes place in not the 90s, so he is considered washed up. And Herb is the creator of that sitcom and has recently been diagnosed with cancer. And that makes BoJack want to reach out to him. The conflict in this episode really does take place in two parts. Before we get into the conflict, I do want to talk about the relationships / power dynamics between BoJack and Herb. So they start off with no power dynamic, as they actually start off as friends. They meet while they are both doing stand-up in the same nightclub, but well into their friendship, Herb's show gets picked up by a network, and Herb tells the network that he wants BoJack to be the star, and BoJack becomes the star. I believe that in just that little tidbit, there are examples of integrative power as well as interpersonal linkages and interpersonal power. The integrative power is that Herb is telling the networks, the executives, like, hey, me and him, we will give you this killer show, showing that they have power together. And the interpersonal power is really her being like, hey, because we're friends, I got you this. So during the run of the show, BoJack's power grows as he is the star. I believe that this is designated power. And after the conflict, like I mentioned before, they don't talk for 20 years. And they only start talking once Herb gets cancer. So before we get into the conflict, again, I do want to talk about their conflict styles. I believe that within this conflict, they both exhibit competition, the competition conflict style. I believe that the competition style is BoJack's dominant one, but also in this episode he does portray some avoidance, which I will talk about within the conflict. So in this episode, we see that BoJack has a very high sense of self and high sense self-preservation, which translates to high assertiveness with low cooperativeness. In this episode, we see multiple times that where BoJack is putting himself forward and protecting himself. And I believe that in the beginning of their conflict, I can't really diagnose what conflict style Herb is, but in the second part of their conflict, he does exhibit competition conflict style. And I personally believe that in this scenario that it had to be competition versus competition. Because I think, never mind. BoJack brings out that side of Herb, because when it comes to BoJack, Herb has learned that he needs to think better of himself and not let BoJack get into his mind. So the conflict. In the 90s, Herb got outed for being gay, and because it was the 90s, the executives were like, we're firing you, you're done. And he asked BoJack, hey, please threaten to walk if they'll listen to you, so that way I don't get fired. This is once again the interpersonal power. And within that time frame, the head executive of the company talks to BoJack and is like, you're not going to threaten to walk. We can ruin you. Once again, I believe that this is distributive and designated power and interpersonal power, as she is the head boss, and I believe she scares BoJack into being not walking. And after that, they do not talk for 20 years. And during that time where they are not talking, this is when I believe BoJack exhibits the avoidance conflict style. As they are not talking, he doesn't mention Herb at all, and he uses a lot of implicit denial and evasive remarks whenever somebody brings up Herb. So the second part of the conflict, I'm sorry this video goes over 5 minutes. There's just a lot. The second part of the conflict is that in present day, Bojack goes to Herb's house to apologize because he feels guilty. When Bojack arrives at the house, Herb exhibits a lot of passive-aggressive behavior. He does not hide it well. However, there is a third party there, and which kind of acts as a mediator, and Herb and Bojack are able to start having a good time. However, Herb starts to feel ill and asks them to leave. Bojack, not feeling satisfied or like the interaction has finished, goes back into the house to apologize. And Herb is like, hey, I don't accept your apology. And Bojack just gets so entitled and is like, why? Why don't you accept it? I believe that this is an example of the pusher-runner style we talked about in class, where Bojack is pushing and being like, you need to accept my apology, and Herb is content to be like, no. Herb also tells him that Bojack thinks he cares about other people when in reality Bojack only cares about himself, implying that Bojack's self-perception is not correct. And the ending lines are just beautiful. Bojack says, I don't know why I came here. And Herb says, yes, you do. And that is the last time they speak to each other, and the conflict remains unresolved.